A few weeks ago, we were in Addis. This was in connection with data revolution, which the UN Secretary General sometime in 2012 appointed eminent people to look at how data can be leveraged, especially as we move out of MDGs to a new dispensation of trying to find how we can reduce poverty. And so these eminent people came up with a report and actually said every continent would have a data consensus. And this consensus is that we need to find ways of releasing data. Some of you who've been here longer know that when we created Kenya Open Data Initiative, we had so many new applications. And there is so much data that is coming from satellite imagery, from social media, from mobile companies, from hospitals. But we have never quite found out how we can take this data and create the enterprise out of it. And so what we would do today is to begin to understand, especially unstructured data, how it can impact us, and from there we can begin to look at how we can create apps that would simplify that data to simple citizens who want such data. For example, we have so much information, so much data on say, the weather patterns, which is so critical to farmers such that they can be able to know when to plant, what to do. We also need other data, for example, soil data, where we can help the farmers to grow the crops that would give them better productivity and reduce poverty. Actually, we are here to find means and ways of poverty reduction. And we are sort of ahead in the sense that most parts of the world have not quite looked at the role of data in poverty reduction. We have done so much. UN has done so much, for example, the Millennium Development Goals. But as they set those goals, they didn't know that one of the critical factors was data. And that is what they are beginning to see. If you recall Kibera, which is just just 1 kilometer from here, for many years we thought there were 2 million people living there. In fact, people used to say the largest shanty in the world. And the time we began to look at the numbers, it came down to 400,000. And even with those numbers, the government did not know what is in Kibera. And so young people recently created Map Kibera to show effectively what is in Kibera. And out of the mapping, they discovered that 94% of the schools in Kibera are privately run. Government had only 4%. This is after the minister had come up with a policy that no students from private schools can be admitted to national public schools, and effectively discriminated the most marginalized people. And when we presented it to him, he was shocked. He said, no, I want to go and see. I said, you come and see. Nobody knows what is in Kibera nobody knew until Kibera was coded, and there is now new data coming out of Kibera, which would begin to impact on policy. And not just policy, there are several other things we can do with that data. Hospital data, for example. Pilots that we've done at Kenyatta National Hospital would practically change the lives of many people. But today, we have a speaker from who works at the UN. This is the Pulse, sponsored by the UN, and the lab is in Uganda. It's actually a regional lab. I met them in Ethiopia, and I said, you people must come to Kenya. And when they come to Kenya, Kenyans will begin to code new things and make the Ugandans angry to code more. Such competition is very healthy in trying to help this continent come out of the poverty. If there is one place that we must have such data, is in Africa. So today we have Chris Lukolyo from the Pulse Lab in Kampala to speak. I think it's going to be mostly unstructured data, which has been organized in such a way that it can be used by ordinary people. And from there we can comment on how we can leverage on such data to create enterprise out of it. So Chris, this is your floor. Come and talk to these people. Asante. Coffee kwake, not me, but him.
Thank you so much, Professor Ndemo. It's such a pleasure to be here. And let me just grab this clicker. So my name is Chris Lukolyo, and like Professor Ndemo mentioned, he met some of my colleagues in Addis Ababa, and we were invited to interact with you all. We jumped at the opportunity because, as I'll explain, we are very eager to sort of energize this space, thinking and innovation in this space. So it's a pleasure to be here. What I will do today, as we try to discuss this idea of, big data and how does it relate to us all, and can we develop applications to benefit the community leveraging big data? What I'll do is share with you how we have approached it at Pulse Lab Kampala. I'll share with you what we do, and in fact invite you all to reach out to us and share examples of practical applications of big data. And then from there, I think we can have a discussion, okay? You let me know how that sounds. All right, so my name is Chris Lukolyo. I'm the Research and Partnerships Coordinator. And so I'm the guy who reaches out to different individuals to seek collaboration. All right, so what is Pulse Lab Kampala? We are part of UN Global Pulse, and UN Global Pulse is an initiative of the UN Secretary General. The vision of UN Global Pulse is really a future in which big data is leveraged responsibly for the public good, okay? And we'll talk about what big data is. I'm sure you're all clued in. And so what UN Global Pulse does is that we try to accelerate discovery, development, and scaled adoption of big data innovations. But for us in the UN, it's for humanitarian and development action. Now, we use the word action because you don't create a cool innovation to sit on a shelf somewhere. You want to actually use it to solve problems, okay? And I think there's a major interest in that. How can we benefit the community? So that's what we do. And so I'm part of Pulse Lab Kampala. And so that's one lab in Kampala, but UN Global Pulse is implemented through a network of labs, okay? So you have one in Kampala, you have one in Jakarta, you have one in New York, and there'll be more, okay? Now in Pulse Lab Kampala, we partner with people in government, in the private sector, in the UN, to find collaborative ways to solve problems, to advance national development goals, to to help, as I'll show in different ways, to benefit the community, okay? And so that's UN Global Pulse. That's what Pulse Lab Kampala is, and that's what it does. But I'll talk a little bit about how we do it, okay? So our expertise at UN Global Pulse is in big data and real-time analytics. We are not experts at poverty reduction. We are not experts at refugee resettlement. We are not, somebody else is an expert at that. But what we do is we collaborate, we come together, okay? And this, I will emphasize this because as you'll discover, nobody has everything they need to work in this space. So a UN agency or a government entity or a private company will have a problem, okay? And they will approach us or we will approach them, and in order to solve that problem, we might say, gee, what type of big data is out there that we can leverage to solve this problem? What analysis techniques can we use to approach this? So it's very collaborative. There are folks in the private sector who might have the data we need to solve these issues, as I'll demonstrate. The folks in government who are aware of the policies governing the issue of interest. There are folks in the private tech entrepreneurship scene who are the free thinkers, the innovators, the people who code, who are the ones who take risks and solve issues. There are people in academia who typically, many times that's where research starts. So people come together to solve problems leveraging big data, okay? And so that's how we work. It's very collaborative, and the team at Pulse Lab Kampala is small, but depending on the project, it expands as needed, okay? All right, I'll spend quite a bit of time on this slide, if you'll allow me. So let's discuss this concept of big data, okay? On the one hand, you have a snapshot, a picture, okay? That is an instant. Once you've taken that picture, that is, you don't know where those cars will go, what those people will do next, okay? On the right-hand side, my right, if I face the screen, you have ongoing activity, okay? Now let's think about that for a minute, and this I took from a Kenyan traffic scenario. You have cars moving, you have people making phone calls, you have traffic cameras capturing this data, you have TV interviews ongoing, you have people texting and using the internet, you have large amounts of information being generated constantly. Constantly. Whether we use it or not is not the concern. This information is being generated all the time, okay? And it's unstructured, like Professor Ndemo mentioned. So, you know, think about how many phone calls are being made, how long is each phone call, how many people are making the calls, who are they talking to, what time of the day, how many cars are passing a certain spot per minute, you know, so as you look at this, the satellite imagery of the city, the people making the calls, the TV interviews, you start to get a sense of the large amounts of data being generated here, okay? And this is, you start to get a concept of, a sense of this concept of big data. These are large amounts of data being generated at high speeds in a variety of forms, being captured by a variety of sensors. So data, big data is all around us. And when we start to ask this question, how does it relate to us, to all of us? We are generating it. When you use your phone, when you walk outside, when you get online, Google knows what you're searching for. This is how it relates to you. As we use more technology, as we adopt mobile phones and different kinds of communication devices, we are generating large amounts of data. There are other folks who might not be holding smartphones or using the internet, but are out farming, they're out doing other things. They too are part of this revolution. There is satellite imagery that's capturing their movements and their effects on the climate and the vegetation. And so there are ways in which big data relates to everybody and it's a global concept. And so I wanted to show this to sort of get us thinking about this concept, and we can sort of come back to it as this discussion progresses. So what can we use this for? And I'll demonstrate later on. There are several ways that we have approached this problem. Because when I talk about digital data, when I talk about big data, it's being generated in large amounts at high speeds, okay? So there's an opportunity here, an opportunity to better assess changes in human well-being, okay? We talk about mobile phones, we talk about internet usage, but are there changes in the way people use their mobile phones if there's a flood, if there's a disaster, okay? Those are the things that, big data can help us better, more quickly assess changes in human well-being. And in this picture, you see a dust storm, Big data offers us an opportunity to develop early warning systems, okay? We can respond quicker to disasters. We can, to some extent, predict where the next outbreak will be. So there is value in leveraging big data for early warning systems. Okay, so that's one practical example, and I will show actual things that we've done with this. Changes in climate and weather patterns, like Professor Ndemo mentioned. As climate patterns change, as weather patterns change, how are the farmers being affected? How are spreads in pests and other plant diseases affecting geographical location? And are there ways to more quickly respond to these changes to help rural communities and other communities indeed? So there are real practical applications here, and my desire is to really just get everybody thinking, and hopefully as the discussion progresses, we can start to see how we can leverage some of the different sources of data. So I will share with you what's going on at Pulse Lab Kampala, what we are doing, and then we can sort of talk about how we've gone about different types of partnerships and so on. As I mentioned earlier, central to our approach in leveraging big data for innovation are partnerships, okay? We are not good at everything, and many times we're not good at anything. So somebody else has certain knowledge and we come together. Okay, so this is just a quick, maybe badly done slide of some of our partners, okay? Different people that we've worked with, and this isn't them all. There's, like I said, there's a network of labs, and many times we leverage resources across the network, okay? And so these are some of the partners that we've worked with. Facebook, of course, there's lots of data being generated there in public discussions. I will talk about later on. There are all these things that areas we don't tamper with when it comes to personal data. Orange Telecom, I think they're still here. They've left the Ugandan market. They sold somebody else, but they're still here. Stellenbosch University, so like I mentioned, academia. This is where research typically is happening. Uganda Telecom, another telecom company, the Ministry of Health, so public sector. Again, they know the policy, they're the public servants. Nakumat, which is, from here, is very eager to work with us as well, and Uchumi. And so you have a cross-section here of partners from different sectors. And like I said, if one is to successfully leverage big data, there's a need to embrace this approach that you won't have all the data, you won't have all the solutions. So the first example here I'll show, let me maybe try to go over here so I can face the same slide you're facing. All right, so on the left-hand side, you have a mapping that shows the outbreak of measles. We used measles in this example because we wanted to prove a concept, and I'll explain the importance of that in a minute. But on the left-hand side, you have the hotspots for measles outbreaks in Uganda during a certain time in 2013, okay? On the right-hand side, you have movement of people from Kampala to different parts of the country in the same time, okay? Now, like was mentioned earlier, so there are some structured sources of data, so healthcare data, that might be structured, it's being collected, but the movement of people, this is from various unstructured sources. And here we partnered with Orange Telecom to look at anonymized data of, if you make, see how to explain this. If I make a phone call from here, okay, so it's possible to know I'm in Nairobi. If the next phone call I make is in Kisumu, it will be bouncing off of a different cell tower than when I made it here. So we don't need to know that that's Chris, he has a child, he's married, that's private. But person X has moved from Nairobi to Kisumu. So we can start to generalize, we can aggregate this information and generalize population movement, okay? And if you look at a disease like measles, maybe it's fairly benign, but if you start to look at some of the more recent hemorrhagic fevers that are in the news, these are diseases of contact, okay? And if we can look at a hotspot of a disease outbreak, and then we can look at movement from that same place using data from a partner in the private sector, we can start to see where do we expect the next outbreak to happen, okay? So this is a real practical application in disease mapping, along with anonymized telecom data to show population movement, to help a Ministry of Health or a CDC to say, where do we expect the next outbreak, okay? So this is one practical application. And I mentioned earlier the need for a proof of concept. This is, again, another approach by Global Pulse. And I should have explained why we are called a lab, in that many times when somebody approaches us with a problem, we won't arrive at this on our first try, You'll take a type of data, tinker with it, use one type of analysis, fail, try again, try a different visualization until you come up with something feasible, okay? So we are a lab because we try and fail in a safe space. Now, if the pilot is successful, if there's something feasible there, then you can scale it, okay? And that's another thing that in sharing with you, I'm saying that if we're to leverage some of these new types of digital data and real-time analysis, there are opportunities. Yes, sir?
I want them to see the behavior patterns of Ugandans, which is like Kenyans. On Saturday, Sunday they are leaving, and Monday they are coming back.
Yeah, so I mean, and that's a good point that, yeah, I actually could have used, I had a different district as well. But yeah, you start to see there are common places, there are common destinations at different times of the year. And you can start to predict certain human behavior, okay? So that's one example. Let's look at another one. Yeah. They look like little earthworms. In this particular case, we partnered with a local startup, a small technology startup in Uganda. Those who have been to Uganda have seen these motorcycle taxis. We call them boda boda, okay? This guy, the startup in this case, their innovation was to have a GPS device in motorcycles to help prevent theft. Okay, so it was an anti-theft device. And suddenly they had all this data, okay? They were helping their customers recover their stolen motorbikes safely, and they had great recovery rates. But they had all this data. They said, wow, hey, Global Pulse, can we do something with this? Okay? And we thought this was a good example to show because, like I said, small technology startup. This wasn't a Safaricom. This wasn't an Orange Telecom. No, this was a guy who had a cool application, but thought, hey, can I actually help the community? Okay. So in this case, we anonymized his data and looked at movements around Kampala city. Okay, so the longer the line, the faster that particular motorbike is moving. The color changes are for either slowing down or speeding up. And so you start to get a sense of, all right, which are the routes most traveled within the city? Where might there be more traffic? Can police, traffic planning, can civil planning, can the city planners use this to better understand where next to deploy, where does the road need fixing? Where can we put traffic lights? So this is a public good from digital data. So it starts to give you a sense of the numerous applications of different types of data. And so the Kampala City Council is now looking at this as a tool to help them in city planning. Okay? So that's another practical application. And like I said, there'll be so many concepts, but at the end of the day, it might be the coolest thing alive. Really, it has to solve a problem. And I think that's a major interest here, like I mentioned.
Let me make a point.
Yes, sir.
Some of you know Sandy, which a courier in Nairobi uses the same GPS. They could actually use this to know where they move their packages most to, and begin to plan much more differently than they do. I don't know whether there is anybody from Sandy here. Sandy. No.
Not today. All right, so yeah, like I said, as you look at these examples, there will be things that come to mind. Wow, what's a practical application of this type of data? And like I said, it's all around us. Sometimes it's a type of data that might not be digital, but there's an opportunity for you to digitize it. And then suddenly you have big data, large amounts of data. In this case, we looked at satellite imagery, okay? Now, satellite imagery is nothing new, okay? And by definition, wouldn't be big data. But when you think of satellite imagery over time, okay? So you're observing an area, and in this case, the concept was, can we better understand the changes in economic well-being in a particular part of the country, okay? Now, we know from the subject matter experts that if somebody is low income, they might roof their house with the grass thatched, it might be a grass thatched house. When they get a little more money, they'll have an iron sheets roof, okay? So the way an iron sheets roof looks on satellite imagery is different from a grass thatched house. So over time, you can actually train. You could do it manually, but the best way to do it is you use machine learning. You train a computer to recognize these things in satellite imagery, and then it tracks it over time, and then now you have big data. Okay, so you have the same place in 2012. And now, again in 2014, and you have a significant change in the number of metal roofs over that time. And so now you can start to glean, the rate of change in economic well-being, okay? And like I said, the opportunity offered by big data is that we can more quickly assess changes in human well-being. We can see what are the things that we would have taken years to know with a paper and pen survey that we can know in a couple of minutes using big data, okay? And so this is, again, very practical application. And these methods do not seek to replace the methods that are being used today. It doesn't replace a national census or a household survey. No, it complements, it adds value, okay? Because then those people responding to changes in human well-being, in economic well-being, can respond faster if they see these changes, okay? So in this case, again, partnering with the Uganda Bureau of Statistics to put this into practice, all right? This is, again, satellite imagery tracking changes in vegetation, okay? So again, over time, what is the vegetation cover? And how's that changing as the years go by? On the right-hand side, on your right, it might be a bit tricky to see, but you have the forest line, you know, so the forest cover, and where you have the red line is how far it has reduced over time, okay? So again, can we use satellite imagery to monitor environmental changes? And can the National Forestry Authority now respond to, wow, there's major deforestation. Can we, in fact, educate the public? Can we combat this? Okay? Yeah. And so, yeah, so you'll notice that let me move over here. So there are going to be times of the year when it's drier than others, but there are opportunities here to actually correlate this with other types of data. So movement of people, okay? What are the movement patterns at the times when certain areas of the country are dry, and where do people go? Can we start to predict migration? Can we start to predict economic activity? Again, based on, you know, these observations. And so, so that's another source of digital data that we've used for practical purposes. All right. In this case, we partnered with Facebook. Okay, we've looked at social media conversations. There are lots of newspapers or radio stations that will have these Facebook pages, and on there will be public discourse, you know, talk about disease, about politics, about contraception, and so on. So in this case, we partnered with a UN agency, UNFPA. They're looking at teenage pregnancy and contraception. And they wanted to understand what are people's perceptions or opinions on different types of contraception, okay? And at some points, they were interested in condoms specifically. Now, it wasn't surprising. Most people thought they were safe, great. Most people were talking about them being free. But above the highlight where it says best, you'll notice, I should have moved this highlight further, where it says fake, okay? Some people think that the condoms in circulation are fake. Now, this could be, you know, some misinformation or just talk. But if you start to see that signal grow bigger, okay, is there a concern? Are there low-quality condoms in the market? Is somebody illegally importing those? Or is there a need to educate the public about condoms that are actually okay, but they just need to be educated on how to use them? So you have here a digital signal resulting from conversations on social media that's informing actual concerns in the public about contraceptives and family planning. And so there's actionable insight here, okay? And so that, again, that's another example in which we were able to help with a teenage pregnancy and contraceptives campaign. Lastly here, all right, I mentioned earlier about how sometimes you have a source of data that might not be digital, but it offers an opportunity to digitize and suddenly have a greater source of insight. With this example, in this case, we analyzed social media data. Okay, now we know that social media usage is not that widely spread, at least in Uganda and several other African countries, maybe here as well. But how can we extend the same concept to a wider population? Okay, so in Uganda, public radio is where all the discussions are happening. In the rural areas, people are calling into local, regional radio stations to discuss problems with farming, issues with pest control, disease outbreak, their need for HIV counseling. These discussions are going on radio. So the question was, how do we take that public discussion and turn it into something like this? Okay? So at Pulse Lab Kampala, we're pioneering a technique where we take radio speech, we digitize it, and then we can listen for keywords and, in effect, do this, okay? So you're looking at public conversation on a much wider scale. And that's an example of a type of data that at some point might not be available for digital analysis, but now we've transcribed and transformed it into a means that allows us to transcribe it. And so you have public discussions in English, you do this for another local language, and suddenly you know if people are talking more about a need for, HIV counseling, or is there an outbreak of a certain pest in a certain region of the country. And so now you're engaging with the people and you can affect policy. You can, again, better understand changes in their well-being and how we can benefit them. So those are some examples of projects that we have going on at Pulse Lab Kampala, where we're trying to leverage big data and real-time analytics for the public good, for humanitarian and development work. But again, like I mentioned, I wanted to give you an idea of how we have approached it, what tools we've used, and then sort of elicit discussion around this. What are your thoughts? What are some ideas you see? And in fact, how can we build applications that benefit the community? Like I mentioned, we work a lot with the private sector. As Professor Ndemo mentioned, we are not just a lab in Kampala, we are a regional lab. I encourage you all to reach out. I have quite a few business cards because we are looking for collaborators. Like we said, we don't know everything and we don't seek to do everything alone. Maybe you have a source of data. Maybe you're in the public sector. Maybe you have an interesting question of analysis, of discussion. Let's talk. Let's work together. Typically, partners in the private sector might have certain analytics tools they've used to analyze data, and they want to apply those to a different type of data that we can look at for humanitarian purposes. They might have certain expertise. Your company might have a data scientist or a data engineer that's great at what they do. Let's work with them. Let's help solve the next Ebola outbreak. Let's address these issues together. You might have a type of data that you're looking to leverage for the public good. So these are just some of the things that partners bring to the table. And like I said, I encourage you all to, reach out. Let's find ways to work together. Let's collaborate. But I didn't want to keep this too long. I wanted mostly the discussion. Hopefully, we can do that. Thank you so much.
If you can go to the one where you go ahead. Another? No? No? The other one? Yeah, this one. Once you get data from a single source like mobile data, as Chris said, you could actually run another data on this. There is something we call mashups in data to see a new thing. For example, here, if you look at the what disease did you say? It's
this was measles data.
Measles data.
Yeah.
That measles is first discovered here and brings it to the city center, and then it goes around. Just think about bigger problems like Ebola, and what the government can do with that by saying, we don't want people this way not moving. But at the same time, like in Kenya, we distribute drugs through KEMSA. And sometimes the pattern of distribution does not help in helping the citizens. But if you get such data, you can map how that can be, how the distribution can be done, and they begin to distribute more logically, that it would be available for people. And then there is more other, those who are interested in business, you can begin to find out what these people go to do there, what do they buy, and then begin to create new models. If they are going to carry bananas from there, then you know what you can do with that. There is actually endless opportunities in enterprise in this, if you begin to run other data, beginning to find why do they go every weekend and come back. I've wondered what Kenyans go to do in their rural homes. Long time ago it was easy to know because they married and left home and they go to show that they are a husband and come back. But nowadays it's changed. So you can ask questions now. Yes, sir.
Shall we pass a mic?
So maybe just a bit of background. I am from Investec Asset Management, so I work for a fund management company. So I just want to understand, how do you connect various stakeholders in this value chain?
Okay.
Or how do we accelerate that at least?
Yeah. How we connect different stakeholders in this. Each one of these projects always starts with, what problem are you trying to solve? Okay. We have had to do a significant amount of relationship building, okay, and have different folks understand what interest they have in a more vibrant, healthier community. So, for example, like Professor Ndemo said, if we were looking at a less benign disease instead of measles, we're looking at Ebola, okay? And we can tell, all right, there's been an outbreak in Kampala. Based on the movement, we expect that the next outbreak will be at the Kenyan border, okay? Now, that might be the interest of only the Ministry of Health because they're in this business, but the private sector has an interest in ensuring that the community in which they do business, where they get profits, that community is healthy. If they're sick with Ebola, they're not going to buy Safaricom airtime. So making that sale, finding that common interest, allowing ourselves to understand that yes, businesses are in business to make money, but there is a common benefit here. And so with every stakeholder, we try to first understand what their interests are, and then try to find a common goal, okay? And so my role in UN Global Pulse is I'm the Partnerships and Research Coordinator. I dedicate all my time to these relationships, not just building them, but nurturing them. I show these visuals to partners, and they'll say, oh, wow. So if people are moving like this, are there new business opportunities for me? As a policy maker, are there gaps in our policy? As a health worker, as a humanitarian agency, are there new programs we could implement? So that's always our approach, is to try and, find some common good, because everybody, I think, eventually is looking to work in a healthier community and so on. I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me know if maybe, yeah.
My name is Emmy. Thank you for a very intriguing presentation. I have 2 questions. I'll try and compress it into one. I'm interested in finding out how you were able to get government interested in this, how we're able to secure political will, because I've tried to find out how it works in Kenya, and taking the example from Dr. Ndemo in terms of how KEMSA supplies its drugs. Someone told me that the people on the ground, they have, I think there's a mobile application, I stand to be corrected, where they're supposed to key in data, but they don't do that at that level. So at the end of the day, the data doesn't flow neither upwards or downwards, and that leads to some sort of failure, yeah? despite having such good initiatives and such good examples. So how do you secure that political will from the top? And that probably sometimes is needed to drive, to motivate even the people at the bottom, at the counties or at the sub-counties. So how do you package that? How do you sell that? And secondly, I'm interested in finding out what has the impact been? How have the Ugandans or the people who actually use these apps engaged with that data? How do they engage with the data? And do you have any stories of impact?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. So how we have gotten the interest of the government. It's always, sometimes it's a question of chance, but I'll tell you the story of Kampala, Pulse Lab Kampala, and how so the former Ministry of Health, the former Minister of Health is now the Prime Minister, okay? And back when he was the Minister of Health, he, as a person, was very interested in how the quick adoption of mobile phones could sort of be leveraged by health workers to better serve the community. Okay, so he said, we need to harness this technology. I think we can do more. After that, he was posted to the UN as the ambassador at the UN, and when he was there, he found UN Global Pulse. And these labs are set up at the invitation of the host government. So he said, no, we need this. So there's always the need for a champion. There's always, politicians, they also have certain interests. If I want to stay in office, I better deliver value to my community, or at least, hopefully that's how it works. So there is a desire, even among politicians, to do good for their people so they can stay in power. And we have appealed to that. We have, of course, there's always the desire to show value, but to say, look, if we can show you where the next outbreak might happen, your people will be very pleased if you can deliver this. If we can tell you what the key issues of concern are in healthcare, and you can take this to your people, imagine how pleased they will be. So there is an interest. There is a desire for people to, again, for politicians, people want to do good.
Actually, the reason why we drew up the African data consensus in Ethiopia was to get the African Union to adopt it. And actually they adopted it. The trouble is going to be whether the government will be willing to release the data. Mm-hmm. Look at Liberia, Liberia, where there was Ebola. They had resisted addressing until Ebola came, and they saw the need to do it. That is the unfortunate thing for African government, that is only the problems that would force us to do some of the things. I think we need to begin to look ahead and say, let us do some of these things because we can leverage on this. The trouble is that some would go and say, this is another Western world thing which they want to bring and be able to count who we are. Yeah. But it is us who actually benefits from this. And that's why we would ask as a people to begin to demand that data. In Kenya, we are lucky that Section 35 of the Constitution provides for that. But the law to operationalize it has taken a little longer, and there are no people pushing Parliament that we need this law so that we begin to create enterprise out of data. So we can't just point to the government. We have a responsibility where we can push the government to begin to do that and begin to show impact. I said Sandy, for example, in Nairobi here, because you asked where there has been impact. Using GPS is a vibrant business going on, leveraging on the motorbikes that you see on the roads here. There are people working there, they are earning, and we are talking about employment creation. It's a huge impact. Will be a huge impact if we are able to understand disease patterns and be able to prevent. Because what happens, we have a very archaic method of drug distribution. Every county says we need equal. So when donors bring drugs, they just divide 47, take to 47. There is no malaria in Garissa. There is malaria in Kisumu. Garissa remains with stocks which can't be used. Kisumu runs out of the stocks. So we must begin to think and say, and the politicians understand there are some things that are prevalent in certain areas, such that if you took more malaria drugs to Kisumu, Homa Bay, in Nyanza, you are actually dealing with the problem in a very adequate way. But if we say we did not get any drugs, you get the drugs which you can't use in northern Kenya. So from this, we can begin to know northern Kenya has this special type of diseases, this one, so that when things are done, they are based on numbers, not what the politicians say. And that's a direction that the UN wants us to go.
Very quickly, there was the question about how has the public engaged with. So we too in Uganda have a system where healthcare centers capture data on a daily basis. It's mobile phone based, it's text based, it's just comma separated values, but they've been trained so they know what to capture on a daily basis, and it's sent into a common database. And like you said, even there, same thing, there's resistance, there's, some centers are not reporting and so on. But over time, again, there has been the desire, that there has been the political will on the parts of the Ministry of Health is very eager to show that yes, we are leading the charge in combating Ebola. We can also do this. So they then enforce these systems and are constantly pushing. But there's the need for constant training and so on and follow-up. The other thing, though, is that once the data is collected, even when it's incomplete, when we show these visualizations, when we analyze the data that's available, even with its gaps, and people start to say, wait a minute, you mean I'm sending in all this data, but it could actually help us know where to allocate malaria medication, where to, then you can make a case rather than sort of threaten somebody. If your healthcare center doesn't deliver, we will imprison you. So it's a constant struggle, but it's a process. And as far as how Ugandans have engaged with these innovations and different types of data, again, so like I said, it's a constant marketing effort. Now we are exploring a project where we're looking at maternal and newborn health, but actually partnering with one of the main newspapers to publicize some of the benefits from this analysis, that people need to know that, when the doctor asks you these questions, they're not just looking to count you like, these are not innovations from other countries. No, they hear actually some benefits. So it's a long struggle and it's not easy, but yes, there is a constant effort to inform and educate, because only when people see value will they be at ease with these implementations. Yeah. There was a question back there. Yeah.
Okay, my name is Valentine, and I wanted to ask on regards to big data, and I realized that the media has a responsibility to play. To what extent do you think that the media is doing so within our communities on addressing issues that probably they might arise as a result of analyzing big data?
Thank you. So when it comes to big data, when it comes to these different types of digital data, like I said, there is a very important aspect, which is to inform and educate the general public and have people interested in this work. So that's the first role. The media has a role to play there. But there is another also equally important role whereby a lot of this data has personal implications. We in the UN, for example, at UN Global Pulse have an entire well, there's actually a web page where some of these data privacy and protection principles are listed. That as you analyze data, as you leverage big data, you have a responsibility to protect the privacy of the people about whom this data speaks. And so similarly, the media has a responsibility to communicate these benefits, but not to alarm the public or to not disclose certain things about, because again, this is personal data, so it's a joint responsibility, not just the media, all of us. And so UN Global Pulse has this data privacy advisory group. We have people from different sectors and even the media to look at what are the challenges, what have we missed, what could be a potential threat in the future if we're looking at different types of digital data. And so media has a responsibility, like the rest of us, to sort of understand that this is a resource that needs to be harnessed responsibly. And so they help us get the word out, they help us educate the folks, but they also help us ask the important questions of, wait a minute, is this safe? Is this,
But media is us. Media normally looks at what we are interested in, and is what we do. That's why you don't see a lot of analysis in our media. We are more interested in negative things. Rain washes out the 50 people. And there is no analysis behind how did this rain, whatever, do. So they need to sell their newspapers. If they begin to say that the rains will be delayed next year and the farmers would be impacted, we have known this from this, some of you will be asking, are they God, because we have not respected, we have not begun to respect that some things can be predicted. Did I say it without saying it negatively? We have not appreciated the role of science, that from this you can build what they call predictive models and be able to know what is going to happen. And until we get to that point and start making noise, there is a company here that does analysis of big data. They can predict rainfall patterns up to almost 1 day difference. But nobody has ever gone to them to even show the pictures, who are these young girls doing this. Our interests are somewhere else, and that's why we like negative media, negative news sells, and it sells big. Yeah. So we need to begin to ask the right questions from media. Sorry. Guys, give to a lady now. There are too many men. Oh, okay.
Hi, my name is Leo. Sorry, I'm at the corner. I wanted to know how you deal, I think following up on your question around privacy, how do you deal with ownership of the data after the projects? Are you also, this data can be reused for several other projects. Are you releasing it as open data or not? Then are these particular projects open source? And how do people who are not necessarily private collaborators with the UN Global Pulse engage with what you've already built and probably extend its functionality?
Okay. That's a good question. So how we deal with data, again, so many times the types of data that we analyze, it might be from a private company or a ministry and so on. They retain the rights to their data. Okay, they maintain full ownership. What we do, we actually reject certain types of data because we can only work with anonymized data. So we will not touch a data set if it has personal information. But also, we actually just put out visualizations and results of analysis that the owner of the data gets the first look. The Ministry of Health has to look at, and I can show this map because it's measles. You know, if it was Ebola, I probably wouldn't show it. But they get the first say of, okay, what can be put out there? What is safe? So that's one. The data remains the property of the provider. We do open source the tools that we use. Everything is open sourced, and again, with the permission of our collaborators, we will put certain things out and have others, you know, take them further. So the toolkits that are used to analyze this data, visualize it, are all publicly available. And I mentioned to you or somebody else, so we are a network of labs, but the tools developed at the Jakarta lab are also used in the Kampala lab and in New York. And if we are approached by, you know, many of these government entities might have an analyst somewhere. He says, oh, by the way, yeah, what did you use for that? We'll point them to it. So we make, as much as we can, everything publicly available. And conversely, we use as much open source technology as we can so that it's that much easier to sort of extend the work that we do. Did I answer all your questions? Okay.
Sorry, I just want to ask a quick question because I'm building on her question.
Okay.
So my name is Wes.
Hi, Wes.
I'm working with a startup that's focused on the addressing problem. So she mentioned the question of ownership. And Dr. Ndemo, this is a conversation we've had before about how the Kenyan government does not want foreign companies collecting mapping data in Kenya. Now, I understand the need for data and how it could be used effectively for policy in Kenya. And of course, as a startup that's working in physical addressing data, I'm excited if there's as much data as possible. But on the other hand, I understand that, you know, data is capital. And whoever owns the data has a lot of capital with them. And some European governments, for example, force people like Google Maps to have local companies, startups, collecting the data. So the data is locally owned, and then they can only get licensed to use that data. So there's a fine balance there between, yes, having data available, but also how do we make sure that we don't lose capital in the sense of data? Like, we are feeding IBM Watts on all this data. Are we losing capital in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Somebody was telling me, wow, I can get a Gmail address for free. I said, yeah, that's because you're the product. You know, you have to understand, I mean, you make a great point that this data is capital. And some of these governments are implementing these things to protect their citizens. There was a campaign on Facebook sometime where somebody was saying, I want to own my data. Google can't have it. Yes, people are aware of this, and you know, several governments, several regulatory bodies will take certain steps to either give leeway or restrict. Every government is approaching it differently. Ultimately, it's going to be an exercise in relationship building. You know, you will have to understand the policies in the environment in which you work and see who has the power, the clout, and who has the access to this data, and can you work together, even if they're maintaining ownership of their data, however they've gotten it, can you safely harness that to benefit your community? But yes, there's a lot of navigation to be done, and like you rightly put it, it's the new capital.
But if we don't do it,
yeah,
someone else will do it. Our national statistic offices all over Africa, none has adopted unstructured data. Then they would come and tell you, poverty situation here has declined by this. They have no numbers to prove that. So we need to make the government to begin to own such data. Then we can get it from the source. If you saw the Tanzanian government, they said, even if you had the best data, you can't use it if it's taken out of Tanzania, unless the government says you use it. Is that? And unless the government says it's our national, and actually closing completely. We don't have the fear that outsiders, what don't they have if you use Google Map and find your home? Yeah, I think we need to be more realistic and begin to do detailed applications like the ones you are doing, knowing that until we build our own capacity to be able to do different things, it is useless to be making noise. And sometimes making noise without even knowing how much data has been taken out of. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, my question is about the currency of data. How long, in your experience, does it take for a certain data set to go, become obsolete, become useless? Like you mentioned about the Kibera population being not what they thought it was. Because as a statistics student, I feel like our methods for analyzing data are pretty much there, and the agendas that drive data are the same year in, year out. What changes are the variables, and like he brings up, we don't own the sophisticated data collection mechanisms, and our data doesn't stay current. So no matter how many applications we build to analyze this, for me, what feels like it's missing is the real-time nature of it. So could you please comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, great question. The approach we've taken is, like I said, you have all these different players. You have the regulator who's saying, all right, you can't take data out of here. You have the private company that owns the data, and they've figured out a way to work in that country. But what we've done is to basically approach it step by step, that if I approach a partner and I have a great concept, I'll say, look, let's start with your historical data. I need to prove that this works, okay? So prove it works, show value. This, the government is in the business of protecting its people, show them value. The private company is in the business of making money, show them value, great, with historical data. After that, make a case for real-time data. Say, wow, we're seeing this with historical data. Can you imagine if we could see this in real time? Can you imagine, so there has to be a case made. There has to be value in somebody providing you real-time access to their data. Because if there's a monitor somewhere in a disaster response center that's showing, okay, there's a flood in this place, this is how people are moving right now, that's of greater value than a theoretical model that's using 2-year-old data, right? But the partners involved need to see value, and so that's the exercise, that first you show that your concept works, the analytical tools you're using are sound, and then make the appeal. Because yes, I agree with you, many times with all these models, you want real-time data, that's where the real value is. And so, yeah.
Actually, you're right, but we also need data even from 1900. That's how you are able to build predictor models. But our ways of gathering data are questionable. Actually, so many documents are asking whether we have accurate data, even the one we call current. I look at the annual statistical survey, and by just looking, I will tell you this data is wrong, because the methods of gathering were not correct. This satellite imagery, most of it is free from the US satellites. And we have a free storage at Watson. You could actually very easily create your own. And I'm pretty sure in the next 5 years, census will be done using satellite imagery from real time, and then average by just simply seeing how many people who woke up from that house at 7, how many are out at this, and by the end of the day, the average would give you the correct population. Forget about this one. We go around chasing people who is doing what here. So it's improving, and you've had the tools are open source. Even us, we must begin to try so that we can add some knowledge around tools of gathering data that is more current than we have. But I will tell you from NSOs, National Statistical Offices, a lot of them have got very wrong data, completely out of, well, I stop there. Now you can give men.
Thank you, Mr. Lukolyo, for this information. Thank you, Dr. Ndemo, for giving it to men. Now, probably two questions combined, if you can allow me. What is the predecessor for this big data? If you consider it to be an emerging technological trend, there must have been a precedent before it. So are you building on a new foundation or an old foundation? What was done with the data that used to be collected before? And what difference did it make? That's the first question. Second question, privacy concerns. It's kind of been addressed here. Who really owns the data that is captured and shared by the UN in this case? And then who handles the storage? And then after that, who is it disseminated to? As Dr. Ndemo said, maybe the wider public might not be able to always know whether it's real, whether it's true or not. So those are my two questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. So the first question about the predecessor. I mentioned earlier about how a lot of the opportunities offered by these new types of digital data do not seek to replace. You know, people have done, I think a young lady there mentioned statistical methods. You know, there are some that are tried and true there. So these, you know, statistical analysis has been done over time, okay? And those methods exist, and you know, people have done national census and so on. That's what existed, and it still does. You know, these methods do not seek to replace. It's important to note, though, that it's actually the tools that have changed. So what's happening here is not the gathering of data. What's happening here is the ability to observe as people go about their daily lives. People have moved and traded for centuries. We are just now able to see it in real time. So what's changing are the tools that allow us to do these things. But population movement, nothing new. You know, immigration and so on. And so the tools have changed, the technologies have changed, but the types of data were always there. We just, you know. And so as far as, I don't know if that gets to the question of the predecessor, that there are traditional methods of analysis and data collection that are still valuable. We are seeking to add value.
Actually, some of the big data was not there. Like now when we talk about mobile data, we couldn't, there was no mobile phones before. Yeah. You talk about satellite imagery, they were not as accurate, and that's why Chris is saying that technologies have changed. Some satellite imagery, you can even pick a very tiny thing on the ground now. This is because technology has been able to change. If you recall the history of census, even the US used to take more than 10 years to do the analysis. Today, we have supercomputers. Within 2 days or 3 days, they have done it. We were not able to bring different data together, what we call mashing up data. That has happened because the tools have improved. There isn't what you can say there was a predecessor of this. It's just that now we can take that old data and begin to apply with the new data and see what we never saw before. And that's why the UN is saying the missing link in terms of solving poverty was actually data. Because the methods that we used to collect the data before were not very accurate. You can send people who are not interested, and they come back and say, I think there are 100,000 there. And you pay them. But now, there are ways of gathering data until you are telling us nonsense. We have this data, and we can be able to change the policy making. Yes.
Thank you so much. Yeah, the other question you had about privacy, you said, when the UN collects this data, I think, again, building on my point before, there is no data collection. There is, you have partners who have now technologies that allow them to collect data as you consume their services. What we are looking to harness here is data that's being collected anyway. So when you use your cell phone, when you browse the internet, that data is being collected anyway. What we're saying is, all right, can we better understand the changes in this community based on that data? And so because we don't need to capture anything, we just partner with whoever has it and say, okay, Google, this is your data. We want to understand how people are moving during times of floods. Can you help us? Great. It stays your data. We will do the analysis. We will show you what we find. If you're comfortable with it, we will share it with the public. So the data is never transferred. It's their property or the property of the government and so on. So very, very safe there in the sense that then you don't need to collect or store anything. Thank you. Yes. Where's the mic?
My name is Benson, freelance researcher. My question is more practical based. I'm trying to work with Nakuru County Ministry of Industrialization on matters to do with agriculture. And recently, I approached a research institute called CARI, and I was asking for several data sets from 2005 to 2014 to do with agriculture farming, because I'm trying to formulate ways in which they can revolutionize farming. And certain question arose, anonymity, like privacy. So they told me, we cannot give you our data sets because we don't know who you're working for and to whom are you going to sell this information. So I told them, I'm trying to work with the Ministry of Industrialization, and those are the guys I'm going to sell this information to them. And then they're like, okay, you need to come up with proper documentation of, let's say, privacy policies to assure us that in case of anything, you're going to be accountable for this. So I suggested, I'm trying to formulate a sort of open database connectivity to which I can port and maybe pool data sets and data sources to which I leave out maybe private information concerning sex and age, number of children, but they were you need to come up with proper documentation of privacy policies. So as UN Global Pulse, do you have certain documentations in place to which if I approach an institute, they can trust me and they can give me the data sets, and I can assure them that I'm not going to use information to do something else, just analysis?
Very big.
I think you entertain the nonsense from them. You pay tax, you funded them to, it is your data, and they refuse to give it to you. You should have gone to court. Yeah, because Section 35 mandates them that they give you the data. It was somebody who was trying to refuse. And I don't think we should entertain it anymore, because they use public resource to collect the data. You pay taxes, you are the one who employs them. Why would they refuse? Yeah? Utarudi huko.
There's also value in, you can align yourself with institutions with more clout, Like I said, our own approach is very collaborative. And sometimes it's for these reasons, that if you approach on your own, the question is, who are you? You know, how do I know? I mean, we can only do the work we do because we are under UN. You know, we are bound by, you know, data is not just a privacy thing, it's a human rights issue. You know, so you're bound by certain things and somebody starts to trust. So yes, you entertained nonsense like Professor Ndemo says, but you could align yourself with certain institutions and say, hey, I'm trying to access this kind of data, I'm having trouble, can I work with you? You have clout, you're respected, and then approach together, you know. So we use the very same technique for the same reason, yeah.
There's something that I remembered. Like a week ago, I was reading an article about how companies might be able to use big data for our own advantage, for the citizens' advantage. And they were talking about how insurance companies, if they knew how well you drove and I don't know what safest routes you took, probably they might reduce your insurance. I don't know how much you pay for your insurance. Probably, I don't know. Do you think
it's already operational in the US? If you smoke, because you try to light up and whatever, your premiums are higher than people who go to church and not smoke. Yeah? These behavior patterns are beginning. These behavior patterns are actually going to impact. It's just our insurance companies have not. They actually get to know whether you smoke. There are several behaviors they look at, and they jack up your premiums. If you are around 19, 20, you pay more because they know every night you are out somewhere, either drinking or doing something, your risk is much higher than somebody who loves his wife and at home every evening. Yeah.
That's such a good point, actually. When the UN Secretary General's office first created this initiative, they recognized that, look, we are doing humanitarian work, but these tools have already been used in the private sector. Okay, so these tools were already in place. People were recognizing the value of big data for business purposes. Of course, one hopes that they will analyze your behavior and reduce your premiums rather than the other way around, find a way to take advantage of you. Both have happened.
Are there any challenges that come along for companies to start using big data?
Oh yeah, I mean, many companies, even though private sector has, especially in the US, has already harnessed this, many of them are still grappling. They don't have the expertise or the tools, and actually many times these are the opportunities for partnership. Many of them will have the data and they suddenly see the opportunity. They're like, wow, if you are going to analyze it, can I look at the analysis? Maybe I can do business with that. So there's still lots of opportunities, like you said, for companies to use the data they have on their customers to benefit their customers. And one of the things we try to emphasize is, again, you have this data. I think we have a common interest in making sure your customers are doing well. You know, so many times they might need to be pointed in the right direction if it's purely profit-driven, but there are challenges. Even they deal with privacy. I think we know that Facebook has faced several challenges and they've had to change their policies a couple of times. Now you can control who sees your posts and so on. These are the results of those challenges. And so, yeah. I don't know if that...
I want you to look at this, and think outside the box. The Karamojong, nobody drives or moves from Kampala to Karamoja, isn't it? Yeah. And the Pokot. So they spend a lot of time stealing cows because they are not part of the other system. Even in Kenya, we have the same problem. Actually, this is true. If you open it up, open up these places, and put mobile numbers on the ears of cows, you will know how they have been stolen from Kenya into you. This is the technology. How the cows. But you realize the place is dark. It's no connectivity or.
Yeah, I mean, and in this case, we used data from one telecom company, which wasn't even the market leader. So, there might be movement. And also sometimes what lights up is what's statistically significant. It doesn't mean there's no movement elsewhere, but it might be insignificant, statistically speaking.
Even in Kenya, it's the same.
Yeah.
It's dark.
Yeah.
Yeah. Last question. No question. Yes, sir. You were scratching? Oh, okay. Okay. So we want to thank you. Tumpigie makofi ya kilo. So our next meeting we will send, when is 23rd of May. We are going to look more at some technologies on commercializing some, because this is basically an entrepreneurship area. We could look at how the application of this in enterprise and other areas. But we have invited a number of people, so I can't say who exactly will be coming, but we are going to talk more on application on entrepreneurship and technologies next time. Nekesa would send some word out on what we are going to do next. So thank you very much. You still have tea outside here, and you can greet those whom you have not greeted. Thank you.